All right, welcome to the SEC. We got our first official mandated availability report. I guess we're not allowed to call it an injury report. It's an availability report, and it has to be filed every Wednesday by 7 p.m. But this is the time every week, folks, where you can now expect to know the tentative statuses of each of the Oklahoma players that are going to be dealing with or are actively dealing with injury in advance of the weekend's game. I am Parker Thune. That is Jesse Crittenden. We are here to discuss the first availability report for Oklahoma, what it means, how much some of these guys that are listed as questionable and or probable might contribute this weekend, and what we maybe didn't expect looking at this injury report. First thing we know, Jesse, without question, is that Gentry Williams is out. To folks that have been following along at OUinsider.com, this is not a huge shock. Gentry Williams is dealing with a shoulder injury that is not an insignificant one. So certainly not a surprise that he's going to miss this football game, but that puts all the more pressure on Des Malone, Kenai Walker, and the rest of the crew at cornerback. You can throw Woody Washington in that mix. You can certainly throw Eli Bowen in that mix after how many snaps he played last week. They're going to be tasked with defending this strong core of Tennessee receivers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the thing that's notable about Gentry Williams' inclusion is that he's listed as out. I think there would have been maybe some room for optimism, maybe not necessarily this coming weekend, but in the future if he was listed as questionable or even as doubtful as Deshaun McCullough is. But the fact that he's ruled as out means OU can go into this weekend knowing that they will not have him and possibly for the next few weeks. But that does put Parker, I'm interested in what this means for the cornerback room because Kendall Dolby missed last week, moving Woody Washington to play a lot of Cheetah as well as Samuel Omasigo with Kenai Walker and Des Malone as the starting cornerbacks. But with Kendall probable to return, what does that mean for the cornerback rotation? It's likely Woody Washington. Who starts next to him? And then what does the rotation look like behind those guys? But either way, it probably does mean some Eli Bowen getting some real snaps in the first SEC game for the Sooners. And that's an interesting development.
Yeah, we haven't seen Makari Vickers yet this season. No injury designation for him, but he's been dealing with some things that have kept him off the field, not suspension related. Yeah, he got arrested in June. It's not pertinent to a suspension. But we haven't seen Makari Vickers yet. We've seen Jacoby Johnson in a very limited capacity. I think based on what we've seen so far, it's got to be Woody Washington and Des Malone that draw the starts. And then Kenai Walker and Eli Bowen are probably your first two rotation guys with the heavy dose of Jacoby Johnson as well. But I will be interested to see if the Sooners rotate as much as we have been accustomed to the last couple of years. Now that you're in the SEC, and this is a big-time must-win football game, and you got to have your best dudes out there when they're fresh, obviously. As we continue perusing this injury report, Deshaun McCullough has not played all year. It does not appear he is going to make his first appearance for Oklahoma this weekend, as he is listed as doubtful. Again, not terribly surprising there. He's working back from that foot injury. He was in a boot and on a scooter for most of fall camp. It was only the beginning of fall camp where he wasn't on that scooter. So Deshaun McCullough is still not in the mix. Cade McIntyre, the third string tight end, listed as questionable. How much he would have played in this contest, or I guess will play if he is available, I'm not sure. We've seen him in a very limited capacity through 3 weeks. Not a ton of snaps. He offers some versatility in that he can line up at tight end or line up at wide receiver, but he is listed as questionable. And then the other two guys listed as questionable, Jesse, both offensive linemen, and these are two guys that they have the same designation, but I feel very differently about their statuses heading into Saturday's game. I feel pretty optimistic that Branson Hickman will play. I do not feel remotely optimistic that Jake Taylor will play.
I said the same thing to Brian Clinton while we were recording the Oklahoma drill earlier today. Even before this came out, I've been pretty optimistic that Branson Hickman will play, less so about Jake Taylor. Now, both have suited up before the Houston and Tulane games. Both went minimally through some pregame warmups. I do think it is slightly optimistic that Jake Taylor is at least listed as questionable, even if you and I both don't expect him to play. But I do think Branson Hickman has been more of a cautious injury. I think they've had this date circled. OU also really needs him. Now they need both of those guys, but they need him with the injuries on the offensive line. I mean, they've been rolling with Josh Bates, who has been serviceable. He's played every snap the last 2 weeks, but is for a lot of intents and purposes basically the fourth string center. Branson Hickman, they brought him in to be the starting center. They've been able to be cautious with their injury as OU has gotten through the non-conference schedule unscathed, even if it wasn't always pretty. But OU's success on offense and their possibility and their chances to win this game, I think largely sit on Branson Hickman returning. And I think him being listed as questionable, although it's not probable, I see that as more optimism that he will play this weekend.
One guy that is listed as probable on that very same unit is a guy that we have not yet seen in 2024, and that would be Troy Everett, who is working back from an injury that required surgery in the spring. This has kind of always been the target date for his return, and everything is on track. He is probable. You are likely to see him on Saturday night, and the expectation is, and ought to be, that he will draw the start at left guard for this team, which allows Jake Sexton to kick out to tackle, his natural position, and I think really solidifies that left side of the offensive line as much so as it has been solidified at this point in the year.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been clear. I mean, we've said this about Jacob Sexton for quite some time that his best position is at left tackle. That is where he has the most experience. That is where he's most comfortable. That's where he's looked the best. But OU's they've moved him around a little bit as injuries have hit this offensive line. But it's clear. I mean, Parker, you look at last week, as soon as Keith Ozaida comes in the game at left guard, what do? They kick Jacob Sexton out to left tackle. That's really where he wants to play. This where this offensive line looks the best. And Parker, to me, Troy Everett's return is big for a lot of reasons. If he does draw the start at left guard, that's big because obviously he's a lot more experienced, especially in an OU uniform compared to some of these other guys. But also, even if he does play at left guard, he gives you some depth at center. If what happens if Branson Hickman can go, but he's limited. What if something happens to him during the game? Troy Everett is a guy that can slide over to center in a pinch. That's where he was working out during the spring before he got injured. He saw some time there last season. So not only big to get an experienced guy at left guard that moves Jacob Sexton to left tackle, but again, big to have some extra depth there at center.
And we don't necessarily know what Troy Everett's going to look like coming off that injury, but I will say this. This is not the 285-pound Troy Everett that was getting tossed around by T'Vondre Sweat last year against Texas. This is a Troy Everett that's in the neighborhood of 310, 315. So he has bulked up significantly. He is SEC ready. And you would expect that he is at the very least able to provide some stability on the left side of that line that just hasn't really been there all year with the injuries that they've been dealing with. Last two on this injury report of note, you have both Nick Anderson and Andrell Anthony listed as probable. It's a weird situation with Anthony because he played in week one, caught a couple passes in week one, suited up but didn't play in both week 2 and week 3. We have yet to see Anderson at all this season. He suited up in week 3 but didn't play, even though that was kind of the expectation going in, is that was going to be where they started to ease him back into action. But based on the probable designation, you can expect to see both of those guys mixed into the passing attack for Oklahoma on Saturday. How much does that make things easier on a guy like Jackson Arnold, who is going to be stepping into more of a hornet's nest than he's had to deal with at any point in his young collegiate career, with the possible exception of that sticky spot against BYU on the road last November?
Look, both of their returns for Angelo Anthony and Nick Anderson are huge. I don't think that the Nick Anderson probable designation is surprising to either of us, and I don't know if the Angelo Anthony one is either. But that was probably more of a question than Nick Anderson status heading into this weekend. And I mean, we saw a little bit of progress. He was able to suit up last week and go through warmups without a brace, but the fact that he's probable and looks like he's on track to play is huge. I mean, Parker, I was digging through some of the numbers for this passing game through the first 3 weeks. I mean, Deion Burks has 22 receptions. He's been great. The rest of the receivers combined have 12 receptions. There just has not been a ton of production outside of Deion Burks. I mean, even last weekend against Tulane, the receivers outside of Deion Burks combined for 2 receptions. They desperately need somebody to be an option for Jackson Arnold. Both of these guys have experience on the field, and both of them have experience in an OU uniform. That's huge. And then Parker, when you look at specifically trying to attack Tennessee, this is an offense. This is Jackson Arnold, who's completed 2 of 13 passes with a target depth of 20 yards or more. There just has been no explosiveness down the field. Both of these guys can offer that. We saw it with Nick Anderson last year, and Andrew Anthony was primarily the deep threat target before he got hurt last year.
Yeah.
So their returns are not only huge just to give OU options, but potentially to make this offense more versatile, to make this passing attack more lethal. And as Brent Venables said on Tuesday, if you've got everything works together. If you've got a more lethal passing attack, you have more opportunities in the running game and vice versa. I honestly think, Parker, OU needs both of these guys to play, and probably play a pretty healthy dose of snaps to have a shot against Tennessee. Them being listed as probable is a step in the right direction.
And they got to be more than decoys, too. They have to make some sort of tangible contribution. It can't be evident from Tennessee's end that those guys are on the field just to distract you, that they're on the field just because of who they are and the I guess the notability of their names, if you will. You got to feel an impact from maybe not both of them, but I think Anderson in particular is a guy that is going to have to produce Saturday night for Oklahoma to be able to hang with Tennessee in this football game. There's a lot more to discuss. We're going to break it down from every angle the remainder of the week right here on the OU Insider YouTube channel, as well as over at OUinsider.com. Again, that's the place to be if you want the inside information and all the exclusive insights that we can't necessarily just spout off into the camera like we can do here. So certainly subscribe to this channel. Subscribe over at OUinsider.com for just a few bucks a month if you are so inclined. And we will see you next week with another installment of Quick Slants. For Jesse Crittenden, I am Parker Thune. Take it easy, everybody.